Hello there. Tonight, I want you to imagine walking through the marble-paved streets of Rome, where the empire rules over 70 million people, stretching from the sands of the Sahara to the green hills of Britain. It's the 2nd century CE. Rome is at its peak. But what was it really like to live during this golden age? Beyond the emperors and conquests, this is the untold story of ordinary life in the world's greatest empire. It is the year 117 CE. Emperor Trajan, hailed as one of Rome's greatest rulers, has expanded the boundaries of the Roman Empire farther than any emperor before him. The empire now stretches from the damp, windswept highlands of northern Britain to the shimmering deserts of Arabia, from the Atlantic shores of Hispania to the fertile valleys of Mesopotamia. No rival state on earth can match its power, wealth, or influence. For millions of people, Roman authority is not a distant idea. It is the law, the infrastructure, the markets, and the order that defines their daily lives. If you enjoyed tonight's story, I'd really appreciate it if you could give it a like, subscribe, or maybe comment on where you are listening from. Now, whether you are looking to just relax, take your mind off of work, or you are getting settled down ready to sleep, you are in the right place. Get yourself comfy, relax, and let's begin our journey together. At its peak, the Roman Empire ruled over an estimated 70 million people, around 1/5 of the entire global population at the time. Its territories spanned 3 continents, covering more than 5 million square kilometers. This vast dominion was bound together not just by military might, but by a sophisticated system of governance, roads, and shared cultural values. The 2nd century CE marked what historians now call the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, a roughly 200-year period of stability, economic growth, and relative security. But what was it like to live during this era, when Rome stood at the height of its power? To answer that, we must first understand the forces that built this golden age. The emperor, or princeps, was at the center of Roman political life. Though the Senate still existed, its role had become largely ceremonial by this point. The real power lay with the emperor, who was both commander-in-chief of the legions and the ultimate authority in matters of law and administration. Trajan, who ruled from 98 CE to 117 CE, was a soldier emperor known for his military campaigns, particularly his conquest of Dacia, modern-day Romania. The immense wealth gained from Dacia's gold mines funded many of the grand architectural projects in Rome, including Trajan's Forum and Trajan's Column. What set Trajan apart was not just his military skill, but his reputation as a just ruler. Ancient historians, including Cassius Dio and Pliny the Younger, praised him for his humility and fairness. Trajan was seen as a model emperor, accessible to the Senate, generous to the people, and deeply committed to improving Rome's infrastructure. After Trajan, the empire entered a period of rule by the so-called 5 good emperors: Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. This line of rulers, 96 to 180 CE, is often considered the most stable and prosperous in Roman history. The Pax Romana wasn't absolute peace. Rebellions still flared in distant provinces, and Rome maintained strong military defenses along its borders. But compared to the chaos of earlier centuries, the empire was remarkably stable. The Mediterranean was safe for trade, piracy was suppressed, and the Roman road network ensured the swift movement of goods, troops, and information. One could travel from the shores of Hispania to the great cities of the Middle East without crossing an official border or facing bandit-infested territories. Roman law applied throughout the empire, and local elites were encouraged to adopt Roman customs, creating a shared cultural framework. What made Rome unique during its peak was its diversity. The empire was a melting pot of cultures, languages, and religions. A Roman citizen in Alexandria might speak Greek and worship Egyptian gods, while a citizen in Gaul might maintain Celtic traditions alongside Roman festivals. Latin and Greek were the lingua franca of the empire, but dozens of local languages, from Aramaic to Berber, continued to thrive. This cosmopolitan nature was reinforced by the expansion of Roman citizenship. By the time of Emperor Trajan, citizenship was no longer confined to Italy. Wealthy or influential individuals in the provinces could earn it through service to the empire, military achievement, or imperial favor. Citizenship conferred tangible benefits: the right to vote, legal protections, and the ability to own property under Roman law. It also carried immense prestige. To be called civis Romanus sum, I am a Roman citizen, was a statement of power and privilege. At its peak, the Roman economy was a marvel of organization and efficiency. Trade routes stretched across land and sea, connecting Rome to distant regions like India and China through intermediaries along the Silk Road. The empire was self-sufficient in many ways, but luxury goods, silk from the East, spices from India, and glassware from the Levant, were highly sought after among the elite. The grain trade, however, was the backbone of the economy. Rome's population of over 1 million people relied heavily on shipments of grain from Egypt and North Africa. The Roman state organized massive fleets to ensure that the people of Rome were fed, even offering free grain distributions, the annona, to prevent famine and unrest. Olive oil from Hispania and wine from Gaul were also staples of the Roman diet and major trade commodities. The Roman road system, spanning over 400,000 kilometers, was essential to this economic network. These roads, often paved with stone and meticulously maintained, allowed for fast movement of goods, messages, and legions. The phrase, "all roads lead to Rome," was not just metaphorical. It reflected the reality of a vast and interconnected empire. Rome's legions were the backbone of its power. At the height of the empire, over 30 legions, each consisting of around 5,000 soldiers, were stationed across the frontiers. These professional soldiers were well trained, disciplined, and equipped with advanced weaponry and armor. The army didn't just defend the empire, it built it. Soldiers constructed roads, forts, and bridges, leaving behind a legacy of infrastructure that would last for centuries. Frontier regions such as the Rhine and Danube rivers were heavily militarized, serving as a buffer against Germanic tribes. Meanwhile, the eastern frontier faced constant pressure from the Parthian Empire. Despite these challenges, Rome maintained its borders through a combination of military strength and strategic diplomacy. While emperors and generals receive much of the attention, the story of Rome's peak is also the story of its ordinary citizens. The life of a Roman varied greatly depending on class, wealth, and location. A senator in Rome enjoyed vast estates, political influence, and access to luxury goods. A plebeian laborer in the city, by contrast, might live in a crowded apartment block, insular, and survive on cheap bread and porridge. Yet even the common people benefited from Rome's prosperity. Public baths, theatres, and circuses were open to all free citizens, providing entertainment and a sense of civic pride. Monumental architecture, temples, aqueducts, and forums was designed not only to glorify the state but to impress and serve the population. To truly understand this golden age, we need to step into the heart of the empire, the city of Rome itself. More than just the capital, it was the stage upon which Roman power, wealth, and culture were displayed in full grandeur. Next, we'll walk through the bustling streets of Rome, from the grandeur of Trajan's Forum to the lively markets and crowded insulae, to see what daily life looked like at the center of the ancient world. To truly grasp the scope and ambition of the Roman Empire at its height, one must imagine walking the cobblestone streets of its capital, Rome. In the early 2nd century CE, during the reigns of Trajan and Hadrian, Rome was more than just a city. It was a symbol of power, civilization, and imperial majesty. Home to over 1 million people, it was the largest and most sophisticated urban center the world had ever seen. Rome wasn't just the administrative center of the empire. It was a living monument to Roman dominance. Every structure, from the soaring arches to the sprawling markets, was a statement. This is the heart of the world. Here, politics, religion, commerce, and daily life collided in vibrant, chaotic, and awe-inspiring fashion. The first thing to strike a visitor would be Rome's sheer scale and organization. Unlike many ancient cities, which grew organically with little planning, Rome in the imperial period was a meticulously designed urban center. Streets were laid out in a logical grid pattern where space allowed. Public buildings, temples, and monuments were centrally placed to maximize visibility and impact. Rome's most iconic structures had dual purposes. They served practical functions while also reinforcing imperial ideology. Nowhere was this clearer than in the construction of Trajan's Forum, the architectural jewel of early 2nd century Rome. Funded by the spoils of the Dacian Wars, it was the largest and most elaborate of all the imperial forums. At the heart of this complex stood Trajan's Column, a towering marble monument carved with a continuous spiral frieze depicting scenes from the emperor's military victories. The message was unmistakable. Rome was mighty, its armies invincible, and its emperor a conqueror and benefactor. Flanking the column were the Basilica Ulpia, a massive public hall used for legal proceedings and civic business, and Trajan's Markets, a multi-level commercial complex with shops, offices, and administrative rooms, essentially the world's first shopping mall. Yet Rome's grandeur wasn't limited to monuments of state. The city was also a marvel of public infrastructure. Its network of aqueducts brought millions of gallons of fresh water into the city each day from distant mountain springs. This water fed not only private homes and fountains, but also public baths, which were central to Roman social life. The baths of Trajan, built on the site of Nero's Golden House, were a massive leisure complex. These were not simply places to wash. They were centers for relaxation, exercise, discussion, and networking. A citizen might begin the day with a workout in the gymnasium, enjoy a massage, soak in the caldarium, hot bath, and finish with a debate in the library or a stroll through the gardens. Public toilets, connected to the sewer system, most famously the Cloaca Maxima, and regularly maintained water fountains showed that the city's planners understood and cared for hygiene at a scale that was unmatched in the ancient world. For many Romans, even the lower classes, this level of public service was a point of civic pride. Religion was deeply embedded in the urban fabric of Rome. Temples to Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and a pantheon of other deities dotted the city. Each neighborhood had its own shrines, and citizens often made daily offerings at household altars. One of the most remarkable religious structures of this era was Hadrian's Pantheon, rebuilt around 126 CE. Its massive dome, still the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world, was an engineering marvel and a spiritual statement. The oculus at the dome's center allowed a beam of sunlight to penetrate the vast space, symbolizing divine presence. The Pantheon was a temple to all gods, a fitting monument for a city at the center of a multicultural empire. While the grand structures projected power, the heartbeat of Rome was found in its markets and narrow back streets, where daily life unfolded with energy and unpredictability. The Forum Romanum, originally a marketplace, remained a key venue for political and commercial activity. Vendors shouted prices over the clamor of customers. Bakers sold warm loaves of bread. Cloth merchants displayed dyed fabrics from Egypt. Street performers drew crowds with music, magic, or crude humor. Commerce flowed easily thanks to Rome's coinage system, standardized weights, and a culture of trade supported by the state. Yet even amid this economic activity, class distinctions were ever present. Elite patrons might arrive on litters carried by slaves, while plebeians jostled through crowds, clutching their meager earnings. Nowhere was the inequality of Rome more visible than in its housing. The wealthy resided in domus, single-family homes with lavish atriums, mosaics, and private gardens. These homes were often tucked behind high walls, offering a quiet retreat from the noise of the city. In contrast, most Romans lived in insulae, multi-story apartment buildings often poorly built and prone to fire or collapse. A ground-floor apartment might house a reasonably comfortable shopkeeper, while upper floors were rented cheaply to laborers or families crammed into single rooms. There were no elevators, just steep stairs, thin walls, and shared latrines. Still, the insulae placed the lower classes close to the city's action. Markets, bathhouses, temples, and forums were all within walking distance, offering access to both services and entertainment. If Rome's monuments impressed visitors, its entertainments dazzled them. The Colosseum, still active in the early 2nd century, hosted gladiatorial games that drew tens of thousands. These spectacles ranged from one-on-one combat to elaborate reenactments of naval battles, naumachii, staged by flooding the arena. The Circus Maximus, even older than the Colosseum, could seat over 150,000 spectators. Here, chariot races captivated audiences who cheered passionately for their favorite teams, reds, blues, greens, or whites. These races were thrilling and dangerous, with crashes, naufragia, drawing gasps from the crowd. Theatres provided more cerebral entertainment. Comedies, tragedies, and political satires, often performed in Greek as well as Latin, were regular fare at venues like the Theatre of Marcellus. Admission was free, often sponsored by wealthy patrons or the emperor himself to win public favor. Rome was not a quiet place. The streets were filled with the clatter of carts, the bark of vendors, and the sounds of people arguing, singing, laughing. Graffiti scrawled on walls ranged from love notes and political slogans to insults and advertisements. Some of the most famous graffiti survives from cities like Pompeii, but Rome itself was alive with informal expression. This was a literate society. Even the poor were exposed to public notices, inscriptions, and performances. Information and misinformation spread rapidly. The glorious city of Rome, with all its splendor and contradiction, was a microcosm of the empire itself. Grand yet gritty, ordered yet chaotic, inclusive yet deeply hierarchical. To understand how this metropolis functioned, we must look beyond its buildings and institutions to the people who lived in it. Who were the citizens of the empire? How did their lives differ based on class, status, and geography? Now, we'll peel back the layers of Roman society, from senators to slaves, and explore what it meant to be a Roman in this golden age. In the great machine of the Roman Empire, it was people, not palaces, temples, or even armies, that kept the gears turning. Rome at its height was home to a vast and diverse population. But who were these people? What did it mean to be a citizen of the Roman Empire? And how did class, birth, or geography affect a person's rights, responsibilities, and daily existence? To answer those questions, we must look not just at the political definition of citizenship, but at the social fabric of the empire itself. From senators clad in purple-bordered togas to field workers in distant provinces, the Roman world was layered, complex, and constantly evolving. In the early Republic, Roman citizenship was a rare and exclusive privilege, restricted primarily to free-born men from Rome and its surrounding territories. But by the 2nd century CE, the idea of who could be Roman had changed dramatically. Citizenship was now extended far beyond Italy, encompassing people across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. This shift wasn't purely philosophical. Citizenship came with concrete legal benefits: the right to own property, enter contracts, marry legally, avoid certain punishments, and, importantly, appeal directly to the emperor in legal matters. Even more, it provided a sense of belonging to the world's most powerful state. The expanding umbrella of citizenship was also politically savvy. By rewarding loyal allies and elites in the provinces with Roman status, emperors bound diverse peoples to the central government. It created a common identity, Romanitas, that helped unify a sprawling empire of hundreds of ethnicities and languages. Roman society was highly stratified, a hierarchy that shaped every aspect of life. At the very top stood the emperor, effectively an autocrat, though often cloaked in republican language. Below him was a powerful elite class of senators and equestrians, followed by the plebeians, or common citizens. Below them were freedmen, former slaves who had earned their freedom, and at the bottom were slaves, who formed a massive, mostly invisible workforce. Senators. The senatorial class consisted of Rome's oldest aristocratic families and the wealthiest landowners across the empire. They held immense social prestige, though by the imperial period, their political power was more symbolic than functional. Nevertheless, they retained important roles in governance, diplomacy, and high-level administration. Senators were expected to display their wealth through public works, sponsorship of games, and the construction of monuments. A man couldn't be a senator unless he possessed a fortune of at least 1 million sesterces, an astronomical sum. Equestrians. Just below the senators were the equites, or equestrian class. Originally, the cavalry in Rome's early military, they had become the empire's managerial and commercial elite. Equestrians held key positions in the imperial bureaucracy: tax collectors, provincial governors, administrators of grain supplies, and even military commanders. Many grew wealthy through trade and finance, and their influence rivaled that of senators, though their social status remained just a notch lower. Plebeians. The vast majority of citizens were plebeians, free-born Roman men and women who had full citizenship rights but little wealth. Their jobs varied widely. Some were shopkeepers, artisans, soldiers, or farmers. While plebeians could vote in assemblies, real political power was limited to the elite. Still, being a citizen offered protections and privileges, even if daily life was often hard. Plebeians received benefits such as subsidized or free grain, public entertainment, and access to baths and temples. Many participated in patronage networks, aligning themselves with a more powerful patronus, patron, in exchange for favors or financial help. Freedmen. Freedmen occupied a unique place in Roman society. These were former slaves who had been manumitted, either by their owners or through purchase of their own freedom. While they could not hold public office or serve in the military, their children would be full Roman citizens. Freedmen often worked in the same trades they had during enslavement, and some became extremely wealthy, especially in fields like trade, shipping, and administration. The rise of successful freedmen occasionally drew scorn from the elite, but their contributions to the economy and urban life were undeniable. Many erected elaborate tombs and inscriptions, eager to assert their new status and commemorate their journey from bondage to citizenship. Slaves. At the bottom of the social pyramid were the slaves, who had no legal personhood and were considered property under Roman law. They were bought, sold, inherited, and even killed with legal impunity. Slaves worked in homes, fields, mines, and factories. Some even served as teachers, secretaries, and doctors. Ironically, slaves in urban households or administrative roles often had better living conditions than free rural laborers. And unlike in some ancient cultures, manumission was common. Slaves who served loyally could hope for eventual freedom, and many were freed by their masters in wills or upon marriage. While Roman women were excluded from voting and political office, they played crucial roles in family, religion, and even public life. Elite women, especially, wielded significant influence behind the scenes. Figures like Plotina, wife of Trajan, and Sabina, wife of Hadrian, were respected, educated, and engaged in imperial politics, art, and charitable works. Women could own property, run businesses, and participate in religious rituals. Wealthy matrons sponsored public works or games, while poorer women worked as vendors, midwives, or laborers. The degree of freedom a woman enjoyed largely depended on her class, wealth, and marital status. Citizenship across the provinces. One of Rome's greatest achievements was its ability to integrate conquered peoples into its citizenry. By the 2nd century CE, cities in North Africa, the Middle East, Gaul, and the Balkans were full of Roman citizens, some native-born, others granted status for military service, tax collection, or civic contributions. Provincial elites often Romanized their identities, taking Roman names, building temples to Roman gods, and educating their children in Latin or Greek. Cities like Leptis Magna in North Africa or Tarraco in Hispania mirrored Roman urban planning and culture. These cities weren't colonial outposts, they were Rome. However, not all subjects of the empire were citizens. Many rural farmers, especially in the outer provinces, lived under Roman rule but did not enjoy full legal rights. It wasn't until 212 CE, under Emperor Caracalla's Constitutio Antoniniana, that nearly all free inhabitants of the empire were granted citizenship, a move designed to increase tax revenue, but one that further blurred the lines between Roman and non-Roman. For many non-citizens, particularly in the provinces, military service offered a pathway to Roman citizenship. Auxiliary soldiers, drawn from non-citizen populations, were promised full citizenship after 25 years of service. This not only incentivized loyalty, but also served as a powerful mechanism for Romanization. Upon retirement, these men often settled in frontier towns, married local women, and raised Roman-speaking, Latin-named children. In this way, the army became a cultural bridge, helping extend Roman identity far beyond the walls of Rome. The Roman Empire at its peak was not a monoculture, but a vibrant tapestry woven from countless lives, backgrounds, and ambitions. From senators in marble atriums to farmers in distant provinces, each citizen helped shape the character of this vast empire. Yet to understand Rome not just as a society, but as a living, breathing experience, we must zoom in further. What did people do each day? How did they work, eat, relax, and worship? Next, we'll step into their homes and routines to explore what daily life really looked like for men, women, and children across the empire. Behind the grandeur of temples and the roar of the Colosseum, beyond the courts of emperors and the halls of senators, Roman civilization thrived in its most essential space, the home. The structure and rhythm of daily life in the Roman Empire's golden age were grounded in family, familia, a unit not just of love and kinship, but also of law, religion, duty, and power. To understand the Roman world, one must understand its domestic heart. Whether in a lavish villa on the Palatine Hill or a cramped apartment in a provincial town, Roman home and family life reflected the values, hierarchies, and complexities of the empire itself. The most iconic Roman home was the domus, the private residence of wealthy citizens, particularly those from the senatorial or equestrian classes. These homes were often architectural marvels, built not just for living, but for displaying status and power. Entering a domus, one would pass through the vestibulum, a small entrance hall often adorned with mosaics or inscriptions. The most famous greeting, salve, welcome, was sometimes inlaid in tile beneath one's feet. Beyond the vestibule lay the atrium, the central reception room of the house. This space was typically open to the sky, with a central impluvium, a sunken pool to collect rainwater from the surrounding roof. Statues, family portraits, imagines, and small altars gave the atrium both sacred and social significance. Off the atrium were rooms for sleeping, cubicula, dining, triclinium, and entertaining. Some homes featured private libraries, inner gardens, horti, and even bath suites. Walls were often covered in intricate frescoes depicting mythological scenes, landscapes, or daily life. Art as both decoration and narrative. The domus was also a space of work. The tablinum, often situated directly opposite the entrance, was the office of the paterfamilias, the male head of the household. From here, he received clients, managed estates, and made decisions that affected not just his household, but his wider community. For the vast majority of Roman citizens, especially in crowded cities like Rome or Alexandria, home was an insula, a multi-story apartment block that could range from modest to precarious. Ground floor units, often occupied by shopkeepers or artisans, had direct street access and sometimes running water. Upper floors were less desirable, darker, smaller, and with no plumbing. Shared latrines and water access meant hygiene could be a challenge, and fires were a constant threat. In fact, the frequency of insular collapses or fires led emperors like Augustus to introduce building regulations and fire brigades, vigils. Despite these hazards, insulae were vibrant communities. Families lived in close quarters, neighbors formed tight bonds, and courtyards buzzed with activity. The insula offered a glimpse of Roman urban life at its most intimate, noisy, lively, and full of interaction. At the center of Roman domestic life was the paterfamilias, the male head of household. Legally, he held patria potestas, father's power, over all members of the family, wife, children, slaves, and even adult sons. He could arrange marriages, disinherit children, or sell slaves, and until later reforms, He even held the theoretical right to execute members of his household. But most paterfamiliae saw their role less as tyrants and more as guardians. Their duty was to uphold the family's honor, manage its wealth, ensure religious observance, and pass on Roman values to the next generation. The paterfamilias was both king and priest within his home. Roman women, particularly elite women, played an essential and often underestimated role in family life. While legally subordinate to male relatives, many women managed households, finances, and even social networks. The ideal Roman matron was virtuous, modest, and industrious, managing slaves, raising children, weaving clothing, and overseeing the domestic economy. However, inscriptions and literature show that many women also ran businesses, managed estates, and made public donations in their own right. Marriage was typically arranged, often as early as the teenage years. A woman passed from the authority of her father to that of her husband. Yet under manus-free marriages, increasingly common in the empire, she retained legal ties to her birth family, giving her more independence. Widowhood, which often came early due to age gaps in marriage, offered many women their greatest freedom. Wealthy widows could control property, patronize artists or temples, and influence political or religious life. Children were deeply valued in Roman families, though infant mortality was high. Parents marked key stages of life with rituals: the lustratio ceremony for newborns, the toga virilis ceremony for boys entering manhood, and the confarreatio for elite marriages. Boys and girls both received education in early years, learning to read, write, and recite poetry. Wealthier families hired tutors, often Greek slaves, while others sent children to ludus, a basic public school. Boys continued to study rhetoric and philosophy if they pursued careers in politics or law. Girls usually focused on domestic skills. Roman education emphasized discipline, memory, and public speaking. The goal was to shape citizens who could contribute to civic life, particularly boys of the elite, who were groomed for leadership. In wealthy Roman homes, slaves were integral members of the household, though their position was always subordinate. Domestic slaves performed a range of tasks: cooking, cleaning, childcare, dressing their masters, and even reading or writing on their behalf. Some slaves developed close relationships with their owners and could gain manumission. Freed household slaves often remained tied to the family as clients or workers, a transition that offered a rare route to social mobility. However, abuse was common, and even trusted slaves could be punished harshly or sold. Roman law recognized slaves as property, not people, though certain customs and laws slowly expanded their protections over time. The Roman home was a religious space. Every household maintained a lararium, a small shrine dedicated to the leres and penates, spirits of the household and ancestors. Each day, the paterfamilias would offer prayers or sacrifices to these deities, seeking their protection and favor. Major family events, births, marriages, deaths, were also marked with rituals. Roman religion was not confined to temples. It lived and breathed in the home, reinforcing the sacredness of family and continuity. A typical day for a Roman family, especially in the cities, began early. The paterfamilias might visit the forum to conduct business or meet clients. The matron managed the home or shopped at local markets. Children went to school. Midday saw a pause for lunch and rest, followed by more work or study. Evenings were social, a shared meal in the triclinium, storytelling, or perhaps a visit to the baths. For the elite, formal dinner parties included multiple courses, entertainment, and philosophical discussion. For the poor, meals were simple: bread, cheese, lentils, and perhaps some wine. The Roman home was more than shelter. It was the crucible of identity, tradition, and power. From the simplest insula to the most opulent villa, Roman domestic life reflected the values of order, hierarchy, and honor. But what happened when you stepped outside your door? What was it like to walk the streets of Rome, to work, shop, worship, or fight for survival? Next, we'll spend a full day in the life of a Roman, following citizens, soldiers, and slaves through the bustling rhythm of their everyday world. It's sunrise in the eternal city. A rooster crows somewhere in the distance, echoed by the clanging of shutters and the creak of carts beginning their morning journey. Rome, the heart of the empire, is waking up. In the 2nd century CE, during the empire's golden age, life in the capital is an intricate dance of social roles, routines, and public life. To truly understand the vibrancy of this period, we must walk a mile in Roman sandals, not just those of emperors or generals, but of everyday citizens. Now, we'll follow 3 individuals: a patrician senator, a plebeian laborer, and a domestic slave, through a typical day in the imperial capital. Their experiences, while starkly different, interweave to form the living pulse of Rome. Morning. The city awakens. As the first light filters through the atrium of his spacious domus, Lucius Cornelius Varro rises. His personal slave brings warm water for washing and helps him dress in a freshly laundered tunic. Soon after, Varro dons his toga praetexta, a white garment with a purple border, signifying his status. Before business begins, he visits his household shrine to make a small offering to the lares. Breakfast is light: bread dipped in honey, olives, and a cup of watered wine. Soon, Varro moves to the tablinum, where he begins the salutatio, the daily reception of his clientes, lower status citizens who depend on his patronage for favors or legal protection. Once complete, he's carried by litter through the bustling city to the Forum Romanum, where he'll attend a Senate meeting or oversee a civic project. For Varro, the morning is not just work. It's a performance of power, presence, and obligation. Elsewhere, in a crowded insula near the Subura district, Gaius Felix wakes to the noises of neighbors stirring and street vendors shouting. He sleeps in a one-room flat with his wife and 2 sons, and breakfast is whatever is left from the night before: some barley bread and goat cheese. He leaves early to reach a nearby construction site. He's helping build a new bathhouse funded by the Emperor Hadrian. As a carpenter, Gaius is respected for his skill, though he's far from wealthy. His tools, hammers, chisels, and planes, are well worn, and his tunic is patched at the seams. The work is hard, but reliable. He appreciates the dignity it brings, especially knowing that many others survive by begging, theft, or unstable labor. Gaius earns enough to keep his family fed, and even save a little. If fortune smiles, his sons will attend school and rise higher than he could. Inside the home of Lucius Cornelius, Philo, a Greek-born slave, has already been up for an hour. His tasks begin before the senator stirs, sweeping floors, heating water, laying out robes. Once his master is dressed and fed, Philo shifts to managing household logistics, directing kitchen staff, preparing scrolls for the senator's correspondence, and reviewing supply lists. Philo is educated. He was once a tutor in his homeland, but now he belongs to this household. His skills make him valuable. Unlike field slaves, he may eventually be freed, perhaps even granted citizenship. Until then, he moves silently and swiftly, ever watchful for signs of discontent or displeasure from his master. Midday, the city in motion. By mid-morning, Rome is humming. The sun reflects off the white marble of temples, aqueducts, and statues. Merchants shout in the marketplaces. Chariots rattle along stone roads. The forum is packed with advocates pleading cases, money changers counting coins, and politicians giving speeches from the rostra. Varro attends a meeting with other senators regarding a proposed aqueduct extension. While decisions are often made behind closed doors, the appearance of consultation maintains the illusion of republican values. Gaius takes his short break at noon, eating a lunch of lentils and dried figs with his co-workers. Sometimes they joke, sometimes they gripe about taxes or prices. A few drink watered wine. Most stretch out in the shade for a brief meridiatio, a midday rest, before work resumes. Philo, meanwhile, checks in with the cook, oversees errands to the market, and helps prepare the triclinium for the evening meal. In some quiet moment, he reads a few lines from a scroll of Homer. It's a fleeting act of personal escape. Afternoon, public life and private duties. As the afternoon drifts on, Rome shifts tempo. Business slows, but the city doesn't sleep. The wealthy take time for leisure, perhaps a walk through the gardens of Sallust, a private visit to a patron, or a speech at a philosophical gathering. Senator Varro attends a brief reception hosted by a fellow senator. There's conversation, wine, and gossip, some political, some personal. The senators complain of grain prices, border tensions, and the emperor's latest building obsession. Yet beneath the surface, alliances form and favors are exchanged. Gaius finishes his work as the sun begins to lower. He returns home, tired but satisfied, stopping briefly at the public baths. He bathes in the tepidarium, enjoys a warm soak, and chats with friends. This is his luxury, a clean body, a hot bath, and laughter among equals. Philo prepares for the evening meal, coordinating the cooks, polishing silverware, lighting oil lamps. He moves carefully, making sure no detail is overlooked. His master's reputation rests on appearances. Evening, meals and reflection. Evening in Rome brings families together. For Senator Varro, dinner is a multi-course convivium with guests. Roasted meats, stuffed dormice, shellfish, vegetables, and plenty of wine. Reclining on couches, diners enjoy music, poetry readings, and philosophical debate. For Gaius, dinner is more modest. Boiled cabbage, beans, and bread, eaten at a small table with his wife and children. He listens to his boys talk about school, smiles at his wife's stories from the market, and occasionally glances out the window to the flicker of torchlight in the streets below. Philo stands nearby during the senator's meal, refilling goblets, managing service. When the last guest leaves and the master retires, he finally eats. In the servant quarters, he shares a meal with other slaves, speaking softly in Greek and Latin. He misses home, but he's made a place here. Night. Rome sleeps uneasily. As night falls, the streets grow quieter but not silent. Some Romans sleep early. Others roam the taverns and insular stairwells, singing, drinking, arguing. The poor gather around public braziers for warmth. The wealthy retreat into guarded homes. Watchmen patrol with torches, and the vigiles, Rome's firemen and night police, keep an eye on the darker corners of the city. Varro sleeps in comfort, unaware of the rats scurrying in alleyways or the thefts carried out under the moon. Gaius tosses restlessly, his back sore from labor. Philo lies awake, thinking of his old life in Corinth, wondering if freedom will ever come. And so the city sleeps, not as one, but in layers, stratified by birth, fortune, and fate. The rhythm of daily life in Rome was shaped by duty, class, and custom, but also by the human desires for comfort, joy, and survival. Rich or poor, citizen or slave, Romans shared routines that connected them across the empire. Yet perhaps nothing united them more powerfully than two things: food and entertainment. Whether at a street vendor's stall or a senator's banquet table, whether watching chariot races or gladiators, Romans consumed and were consumed by spectacle and indulgence. Next, we'll explore how Romans ate, drank, and celebrated, and what these pleasures revealed about their world. In a city of towering temples, austere philosophy, and military might, it's easy to forget one fundamental truth. Romans loved to be entertained. They adored spectacle, praised extravagance, and indulged deeply in the pleasures of the table. At the height of the empire in the 2nd century CE, entertainment and food were more than leisure. They were political tools, social glue, and a daily ritual of Roman identity. The phrase bread and circuses, panem et circenses, coined by the satirist Juvenal, wasn't just cynicism. It was an accurate description of how the empire kept the masses content. Give the people food and games, and they would stay loyal, even indifferent to politics or liberty. But the reality was more complex. Entertainment and food were deeply embedded in religion, tradition, and class, and they revealed as much about Roman values as they did about their pleasures. At the center of Roman entertainment stood the amphitheater, a place of death, glory, and state-sponsored drama. The most famous of all was the Colosseum, completed under the Flavian emperors and still active in the 2nd century CE. This vast arena seated over 50,000 spectators and hosted the most anticipated form of Roman entertainment: gladiatorial games. These spectacles, known as munera, were initially private funerary offerings, combat staged to honor the dead. But by the imperial period, they had become public performances, often funded by emperors or wealthy elites seeking public favor. Gladiators, many of them slaves, prisoners of war, or volunteers, trained in special schools, ludi, and competed for fame, freedom, or survival. Contrary to popular myth, not all games were to the death. Gladiators were expensive investments, and a good fight often ended with both combatants surviving, one victorious, the other defeated but spared. However, death was always possible, and when it came, it was dramatic, public, and final. The games weren't limited to man-on-man combat. Beast hunts, venaciones, pitted hunters against exotic animals imported from the edges of the empire. Lions, elephants, bears, crocodiles. There were even mock naval battles, naumachiae, staged in flooded arenas or specially constructed basins, reenacting famous sea battles for roaring crowds. Even more popular than gladiator games were the chariot races at the Circus Maximus, the largest stadium in Rome with seating for over 150,000 people. Races featured teams, reds, blues, greens, and whites, each with passionate fan bases. The charioteers, often slaves or freedmen, could achieve immense fame and wealth, even rivaling modern celebrities in status. Races were thrilling, dangerous, and highly competitive. Crashes, naufragia, were common, and, for many spectators, the highlight. Betting was rampant. Emperors were known to show favoritism, and riots occasionally broke out when passions ran too hot. The circus was where all classes mingled. Senators, plebeians, women, and even slaves attended. It was one of the few spaces in Roman life that cut across the rigid social structure. everyone united by speed, danger, and spectacle. Beyond blood sports, Romans enjoyed theatre and performance. Theatres like the theatre of Marcellus staged comedies, tragedies, and pantomimes. Many plays were adaptations of Greek works, filled with satire, moral lessons, or slapstick humour. Music and poetry readings were common among the elite. Well-read Romans could recite Virgil or Horace, and professional musicians performed at dinner parties, temples, and street corners. Lyres, flutes, drums, and hydraulis, water-powered organs, were used in various settings, from solemn rituals to bawdy tavern songs. Public festivals were numerous and constant. Nearly every month included games, ludi, feasts, or religious ceremonies. Saturnalia, held in December, was the most famous, an inversion of social order where slaves were temporarily treated as equals, gifts were exchanged, and merrymaking was encouraged. These events weren't just distractions, they were statements. They reinforced Rome's identity as a powerful, ordered, and cultured civilization, while also reminding citizens of the generosity and might of their emperor. Entertainment in Rome was tightly connected to politics and social control. Emperors funded games and festivals to curry favor with the masses. Admission was free, and seating followed social rank. Senators in front, plebs behind, women and slaves in upper tiers. A successful set of games could make or break an emperor's popularity. Trajan's victory celebrations after the Dacian Wars included months of games and public feasting. Hadrian built theatres and funded games throughout the provinces, spreading Roman culture while reinforcing loyalty. The idea was simple: keep the people entertained, and they'll remain peaceful. But this wasn't manipulation. It was a mutual understanding. Romans expected their rulers to be generous, to feed their hunger for excitement as well as bread. If games fed the soul, food fed the body, and Roman attitudes toward eating were complex. Food was both sustenance and status symbol. The elite held lavish banquets, while the poor lived on rations, yet all Romans shared a common culinary heritage. The average Roman diet was based on grains, primarily wheat and barley. Bread was a staple food, and the government distributed it freely to citizens through the annona, a grain dole designed to prevent starvation and unrest. Pulse, a porridge made from grains and water, was a common meal for soldiers and the poor. Legumes like lentils and chickpeas, vegetables such as cabbage, onions and garlic, and fruits like figs, grapes and apples made up much of the average Roman's diet. Fish and cheese were common among the middle class, while meat was rarer and often reserved for special occasions. Romans also loved sauces, especially garum, a fermented fish sauce used in nearly everything, from meats to desserts. For the wealthy, eating was an art form and a public display of refinement. Dinner parties could stretch for hours, with multiple courses served by slaves, and dishes designed to impress as much as to nourish. Menus might include stuffed dormice, honey-glazed ham, oysters from the Bay of Naples, and exotic fruits imported from Africa. Dishes were often elaborately spiced and sweetened. The Roman palate valued variety, novelty, and contrast, combining sweet with salty, hot with cold. Banquets were also cultural performances. Between courses, there might be poetry recitations, music, acrobatics, or philosophical debate. The guests reclined on couches in the triclinium, sipping wine diluted with water and sweetened with honey. But this excess was also satirized. Writers like Petronius and Juvenal mocked the gluttony of the rich, pointing to bloated stomachs and vomitoria, not actual vomiting rooms, but misconstrued from the term vomitorium. which referred to passageways in stadiums. Most Romans, particularly in cities, didn't cook at home. The insulae had no private kitchens, and fire risk discouraged indoor cooking. Instead, people ate at popinae, taverns, or bought food from street vendors. Vendors sold bread, cheese, dried fruits, hot sausages, and wine. The Roman equivalent of fast food. These meals were cheap, filling, and consumed on the go. Taverns were hubs of gossip, gaming, and sometimes criminal activity, places where social lines blurred. Wine was ubiquitous and consumed by nearly everyone, though quality varied wildly. Elite Romans drank aged, imported vintages. The poor drank rough blends or posca, a sour wine mixed with water and herbs. In Rome's golden age, eating and entertainment were more than leisure. They were deeply symbolic. They revealed who you were, how much you had, and where you stood in society. Whether a senator reclining at a feast or a pleb cheering at the circus, every Roman participated in this shared culture of spectacle and indulgence. But these pleasures were made possible by something else: a vast economic engine of labor, trade, and logistics. Now, we'll go behind the scenes to explore how Rome fed, paid, and powered its empire. We'll uncover the working world, from merchants and craftsmen to farmers and financiers, and examine how the Roman economy underpinned its greatness. Beneath the marble columns, behind the theatres and banquets, and beyond the imperial pageantry, there was labour, vast, relentless, and essential. Rome in the 2nd century CE was not merely a military or political powerhouse. It was an economic colossus, sustained by a deeply interconnected system of agriculture, trade, taxation, and skilled labour. For the empire to function at its height, food had to arrive in time, soldiers had to be paid, roads had to be built, and cities had to be maintained. It was a world of countless professions: merchants, moneylenders, artisans, farmers, shipbuilders, miners, and more. The glory of Rome rested not only on conquest, but on commerce and the backs of its workers. Despite the urban glamour of cities like Rome, agriculture remained the core of the Roman economy. The vast majority of the empire's population lived in the countryside, working as farmers, labourers, or tenants. Grain, olives, and grapes formed the Mediterranean triad of agricultural staples, with variations depending on region. In Egypt and North Africa, grain production was critical. These regions were known as Rome's breadbaskets, shipping thousands of tons annually to feed the capital. In Italy and Hispania, olive oil was a key export, filling amphorae that ended up as far afield as Gaul and Germania. The hills of Gaul and southern Italy were covered with vineyards, producing the wines that fueled both daily life and lavish feasts. Large estates, latifundia, dominated much of this production, owned by wealthy elites and worked by slaves or tenant farmers, colony. These estates operated with surprising efficiency, producing surplus crops for trade. However, small family farms still dotted the countryside, particularly in less fertile or more mountainous regions. Farm labour was seasonal and intense. Sowing, pruning, harvesting, pressing, all required skill, timing, and coordination. Tools were simple: ploughs, sickles, baskets, but their use was refined through centuries of experience. In cities, especially in Rome, Alexandria, and Carthage, a vibrant class of artisans and craftsmen powered daily life. These men and women worked in organized guilds and workshops, producing goods ranging from furniture and tools to pottery, jewelry, clothing, and metalwork. Blacksmiths forged tools and weapons. Stonemasons carved monuments. Weavers and fullers processed textiles. and potters turned out the ubiquitous terra sigillata, the fine red pottery found across the empire. Some of the most skilled artisans were freedmen or even slaves, whose talents could lead to both personal success and economic growth for their patrons. Craft neighborhoods often clustered by trade. The Subura district in Rome, for instance, was home to leatherworkers, cobblers, and butchers. The streets buzzed with hammering, scraping, dyeing, and bargaining. These workers made up the core of the plebeian population, modest in means, but vital to Rome's operation. Trade was the lifeblood of the Roman economy. With peace along most frontiers and a secure network of roads and ports, merchants travelled extensively. Sea trade connected ports from Britannia to Alexandria, and overland routes moved goods across provinces with remarkable speed. Rome imported luxury items such as silk from China, spices from India, ivory from Africa, and amber from the Baltic. In exchange, it exported olive oil, wine, glass, and finished goods. Trading companies operated much like modern businesses, employing agents, contracting ships, and investing in regional markets. Merchants could grow very wealthy. Successful ones might buy land, enter the equestrian order, or sponsor public works. But trade was not without risk. Storms, piracy, and corruption could devastate shipments. Insurance existed, but accountability often depended on local power and imperial support. A key player in this system was the naviculari, ship owners responsible for moving large cargoes, especially grain. In exchange for taking on this critical role, they received tax breaks and imperial protections. Each Roman city, no matter its size, had at least one forum, a public marketplace that served as the commercial heart of urban life. Here, vendors sold fresh produce, meats, pottery, spices, and textiles. Markets were divided by type: the macellum for meat and fish, tabernae for general goods, and specialized stalls for cloth, candles, or books. Transactions were made using a system of coins: bronze, asses, silver, denarii, and gold, aurae. Prices fluctuated with supply, harvests, and imperial demand. We even have graffiti showing prices for bread, wine, and haircuts, giving us insight into the cost of living for ordinary Romans. Banks, argentarii, also operated in forums, offering loans, currency exchange, and record keeping. While not banks in the modern sense, they played a crucial role in facilitating commercial life. Moneylenders sometimes worked alongside them, though with reputations that varied from respected to predatory. Maintaining such a vast empire required immense revenue. The Roman government funded the military, public buildings, grain distributions, festivals, and bureaucracy through a complex tax system. Taxes were collected both in cash and kind. Landowners paid based on acreage, harvest yield, or value. Merchants faced customs duties and transit fees. Cities paid tribute, and mines were taxed on output. Even freed slaves paid a manumission fee to the state. Tax collectors, known as publicani, were once private contractors, but increasingly replaced by state officials by the 2nd century CE. The system was prone to abuse, especially in remote provinces where oversight was weaker. To streamline taxes and ensure delivery of key resources like grain, the empire maintained a state-managed logistics network. The Cura Annonae, or grain supply service, organized storage, shipment, and distribution, particularly vital for the city of Rome, where grain riots could topple emperors. No economic discussion of Rome is complete without acknowledging slavery, which underpinned nearly every sector of the economy. Slaves worked in fields, homes, mines, workshops, and even public offices. They were cooks, scribes, accountants, and artisans. While some slaves lived harsh lives, particularly those in mines or rural estates, others found paths to better conditions or freedom. Skilled slaves could buy or earn manumission, and, in some cases, surpass the economic power of freeborn citizens. Slavery was not racially based, but drawn from prisoners of war, piracy, debt, and the offspring of other slaves. This system, while normalized in Roman culture, created constant tension, especially in regions with high slave populations. Each Roman province had its own economic strengths. Egypt was the empire's breadbasket. Hispania produced olive oil, silver, and gold. Gaul was known for wine and ceramics. Asia Minor exported textiles and marble. Britannia contributed tin, lead, and wool. Governors ensured these regions met imperial quotas and maintained local economies. While taxation was burdensome, Rome invested in roads, aqueducts, and security, which often boosted local prosperity. Romanization of local elites through land grants and political favor ensured loyalty and economic integration. Despite the rigid class system, Rome's economy allowed some degree of social mobility. Freedmen could rise to become wealthy merchants or administrators. Equestrians could become senators. Skilled laborers could gain patrons and wealth. Success in trade, property, or imperial service could transform a family's fortunes in a single generation. Inscriptions throughout the empire record the pride of men and women who started as slaves or humble workers and died as respected citizens. Still, the majority of Romans lived modest lives, working hard, saving what they could, and relying on community and faith in the system to survive and, hopefully, rise. The Roman economy was a machine of remarkable complexity, fed by labor, sustained by agriculture, and propelled by global trade. Its efficiency, however, was tied deeply to belief, to the rituals, gods, and superstitions that shaped Roman thought. Now, we turn from coins and commerce to temples and sacrifice. What did Romans believe? How did religion shape their homes, their cities, and their empire? Join us as we explore the spiritual world of Rome, from household gods to imperial cults, and the mystery religions that promised more than just prosperity. To walk through a Roman city in the 2nd century CE was to walk through a world soaked in religion. Temples stood on every major street, shrines nestled in alleyways, and household altars burned incense at dawn. The divine was everywhere, in the market, in the home, in the bathhouse, on the battlefield. And yet, Roman religion was not a matter of personal salvation or moral commandments. It was a deeply pragmatic, ritual-centered system, a contract between mortals and the gods. At its height, the Roman Empire was home to a staggering diversity of beliefs. From the traditional pantheon of Jupiter, Mars, and Venus to the mystery cults of Isis, Mithras, and Cybele. Religion in Rome was less about orthodoxy and more about practice, participation, and tradition. What mattered was not what you believed in your heart, but what rituals you performed, and when, and how, and for whom. Rome's official religion was rooted in the pantheon, a structured group of gods and goddesses, many of them borrowed and adapted from the Greek world. Each deity had specific domains, attributes, and festivals. Jupiter, Optimus Maximus, king of the gods, guardian of Rome's destiny. Juno, protector of women and the state. Mars, god of war and also agriculture in earlier times. Minerva, goddess of wisdom and crafts. Venus, goddess of love, beauty, and fertility. Temples dedicated to these gods were central to public life. Rituals, sacrifices, and festivals maintained the Pax Deorum, the peace of the gods, which was believed to be essential for Rome's prosperity and military success. If the gods were angered through neglect or impiety, disaster would follow. These public rituals were conducted by state priests, the pontifices, augurs, and flamines, often drawn from the aristocracy. Religious offices were a form of civic service, not separate from political life. The Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of Rome, was often the emperor himself, blending political and divine authority. If state religion governed the empire's fate, household religion governed daily life. Nearly every Roman home contained a lararium, a small shrine to the lares, guardian spirits of the home, and the penates, protectors of the pantry and provisions. Each morning, the head of the household, the paterfamilias, would offer prayers, incense, and perhaps small food offerings to these spirits, seeking protection and good fortune. Family ancestors were also venerated, and their images, called imagines, were kept in the atrium. This domestic piety reinforced Roman values, respect for tradition, family, hierarchy, and the proper performance of duties. Religion wasn't something done once a week. It was woven into the fabric of life. The Roman calendar was packed with religious festivals, nearly 100 annually by some estimates. These marked agricultural seasons, honored specific gods, or celebrated civic events. Some of the most important included Saturnalia, December, a festival of role reversal, gift-giving, and revelry. Masters served slaves, and rules were relaxed. Lupercalia, February, fertility rites involving young men running through the streets, striking onlookers with goatskin thongs for luck. Parentalia, February, a time to honor the dead and visit family tombs. Each city and region had its own festivals as well, adapted from local traditions and blended with Roman forms. Participation in public ritual was a matter of civic duty. Citizens were expected to attend, and emperors often funded grand sacrifices and games to coincide with major events. By the 2nd century CE, a unique form of religious observance had emerged, the imperial cult. While no emperor claimed to be a god during his lifetime, with rare exceptions like Caligula, they were often deified after death by vote of the Senate. Temples and altars were built in honor of the divine Augustus, divine Trajan, and others. Sacrifices were made to the genius, spirit, of the reigning emperor. In the provinces, especially the eastern ones, emperor worship was more explicit and widespread, often blending with local traditions. The imperial cult served a political purpose. It unified the empire under a shared loyalty, reinforced the emperor's authority, and provided a focus for provincial devotion to Rome. Traditional Roman religion, while public and official, did not offer emotional fulfillment or promises of salvation. For many citizens, especially in the urban centers, this created a hunger for more personal, mystical experiences. Enter the mystery religions, imported spiritual systems that offered secret rites, spiritual rebirth, and life after death. These included the cult of Isis from Egypt, focused on the goddess Isis, her devotion to her husband Osiris, and themes of rebirth and protection. Mithraism from Persia, a male-only cult centered on Mithras, who was born from a rock and slayed a cosmic bull. Its followers met in underground temples, practiced initiation rituals, and emphasized loyalty and strength. The cult of Cybele from Anatolia, involving ecstatic worship, music, and sometimes extreme rites like self-castration for priests. These religions were not in open opposition to Roman belief. They were usually tolerated as long as they didn't threaten the state or refused to honor Roman gods. Many Romans practiced multiple forms of worship, attending public rituals, maintaining household shrines, and secretly participating in mystery cults. While Rome was a world of temples and priests, it was also a deeply superstitious society. Omens, portents, and augury, the interpretation of bird flights, were taken seriously, even in government decisions. Astrology was immensely popular, despite occasional bans. Personal horoscopes, dream interpretations, and magical amulets were sold in marketplaces. Some people wore phallus charms to ward off the evil eye. Others carried small scrolls with protective spells. Even emperors were not immune. Augustus famously delayed battles or voyages based on omens. Hadrian consulted astrologers and mystics. The lines between official religion, folk belief, and magic were often blurry. Rome was, by and large, a religiously tolerant empire. Local gods were absorbed into the Roman pantheon, and subject peoples were generally allowed to worship freely, so long as they also acknowledged Roman deities and the emperor. However, this expectation caused tension with religions that demanded exclusive devotion, most notably Judaism and, increasingly in the 2nd century, Christianity. Christians refused to worship Roman gods or participate in sacrifices, which to Roman eyes seemed subversive and antisocial. Persecutions were sporadic during the Golden Age, not yet systematic. But suspicion was growing. Christians were accused of atheism for not believing in the gods, cannibalism, a misunderstanding of the Eucharist, and secret plots. What began as a small sect would soon pose one of the greatest challenges to Rome's religious identity. In Rome's Golden Age, religion was everywhere, binding family and state, explaining fortune and disaster, promising favor and survival. It was not merely belief, but behavior, and its rituals shaped every Roman's experience of the world. But belief alone could not maintain the empire. Rome also needed order, structure, and enforcement. Who upheld the laws? How was justice carried out in such a vast and varied empire? Next, we step into the courtroom, the garrison, and the dungeon to explore the machinery of Roman law and order, its achievements, its brutality, and its enduring legacy. While temples and markets shaped the rhythm of Roman life, it was law and order that gave the empire its backbone. At the height of its power, the Roman Empire governed over 70 million people across 3 continents. How did it maintain control, resolve disputes, and keep peace across such a vast and diverse territory? The answer lies in one of Rome's greatest legacies, its legal system. Built over centuries, Roman law blended practical governance with philosophical principles. It was a system that prized written statutes, clear categories, and precedent, but also one that could be brutal, hierarchical, and unflinchingly pragmatic. In the 2nd century CE, under emperors like Hadrian and Antoninus Pius, Roman law reached a level of maturity and sophistication unmatched in the ancient world. It regulated everything from land disputes and marriage contracts to theft, slavery, and citizenship. And through its courts, magistrates, and imperial edicts, Rome projected not just power, but order. Roman law began as a set of unwritten customs, but by the mid-Republic, it became formalized with the 12 Tables, 450 BCE, Rome's first public legal code. Over time, new laws, leges, decrees from the Senate, Senatus Consulta, edicts from magistrates, and decisions by emperors, constitutiones, layered the system into a complex but adaptable framework. By the 2nd century CE, the Praetorian Edict, the evolving list of legal principles announced annually by the praetor, a senior magistrate, had become a cornerstone of the legal system. The emperor's authority also carried legal weight. Imperial rulings could set precedent and were often considered final. Legal training was a profession, and jurists, legal scholars and advisors, played a crucial role in shaping the law. Men like Gaius and Ulpian wrote treatises that clarified and organized Roman law, many of which would be compiled centuries later in the Corpus Juris Civilis, the basis for modern civil law systems in Europe. In Rome itself, the legal system was highly organized. Trials were held in basilicas, public halls near the Forum, presided over by magistrates such as praetors, consuls, or special judicial officials. Citizens could bring lawsuits for everything from unpaid debts to inheritance claims. The system relied heavily on written contracts, witnesses, and legal advocates. Men trained in oratory and law, hired to plead one's case. Criminal trials, particularly high-profile ones, drew public attention. While the accused had the right to a defense, trials could be heavily influenced by social status and political power. A senator accused of embezzlement might receive leniency. A poor man caught stealing a loaf of bread might face flogging or worse. Justice in Rome was fast by ancient standards, but not always fair. Outside of Rome, justice was more variable. Provinces were divided into territorial districts, each overseen by a governor, legatus or proconsul, with broad judicial powers. Local magistrates and city councils handled minor cases, but serious crimes, murder, treason, large-scale theft, were referred to the governor. Provincial justice combined Roman law with local customs. In the East, for example, Greek-speaking cities retained elements of Hellenistic legal tradition, while in Egypt, local judges interpreted laws alongside Roman principles. This flexibility helped maintain local loyalty while reinforcing Roman control. Traveling judges, appointed by the emperor, sometimes conducted assizes, circuit courts that visited remote towns to hear cases and deliver imperial justice. These were both legal proceedings and public displays of Roman authority. Roman punishments were calibrated based on status. Citizens had rights and protections that non-citizens or slaves did not. A Roman citizen could not be flogged or crucified without a trial. Slaves, on the other hand, could be beaten, branded, or executed at their master's discretion. Common punishments included fines, often used for property crimes or breaches of contract; exile, a sentence of banishment, sometimes temporary, for political offences or moral transgressions; public beating or flogging, usually reserved for slaves or non-citizens; forced labour, convicts could be sentenced to the mines or galleys; crucifixion, a brutal and public death reserved for the worst offenders, especially rebellious slaves or non-citizens accused of treason. The Roman emphasis on public punishment, executions, humiliation, corporal punishment, was meant to deter others and demonstrate state power. Rome did not have a police force in the modern sense, but it had mechanisms to maintain order. Cohortes urbanae, a paramilitary force established by Augustus to patrol the city and handle riots or public disorder. Vigils, originally formed as firefighters, they also acted as a kind of night watch or urban constabulary. Lictors, personal attendants of magistrates who carried fasces, bundles of rods with axes, symbolizing the power to punish. They enforced the magistrates' orders and maintained order in court. For the most part, however, citizens were expected to defend their own interests. to bring charges, hire advocates, and seek justice proactively. When it came to interrogating slaves or suspected criminals, the Romans did not shy away from torture. It was considered a legitimate tool for extracting truth, especially when used on those without citizen status. This practice horrifies modern sensibilities, but to Romans, the value of truth and security often outweighed the rights of the accused. A slave's testimony was generally inadmissible unless extracted under torture, a paradoxical standard by modern legal logic. Despite the brutality of some practices, Roman law did uphold certain rights for citizens: the right to appeal a verdict, especially to the emperor; the right to a fair trial with defense representation; the right to face one's accuser and examine evidence; the right to protection from arbitrary punishment, at least for those of proper rank. The most famous case of citizen rights may be that of St. Paul, who, as a Roman citizen, was able to appeal directly to Caesar in the New Testament. His citizenship saved him from a summary execution. Roman law wasn't just a system of rules, it was a source of pride. For many provincial elites, gaining Roman citizenship meant access to superior legal protections. Cities sought municipal status so their people could benefit from Roman legal standards. This created a shared legal culture that outlasted the empire itself. Even after the fall of the Western Empire, Roman law was studied, preserved, and eventually codified under Emperor Justinian in the 6th century. That codification, the corpus juris civilis, became the bedrock of many modern legal systems. The Roman system of law and order was both admirable and ruthless, a blend of high ideals and hard power. It kept peace across a sprawling empire, ensured contracts were honored, and allowed many to seek redress for wrongs. But it also reinforced hierarchy, punished the poor more harshly, and reserved true justice for those with influence. And yet, for all its strength and structure, even this great legal machine could not prevent the forces of decline. As we reach the end of this journey, we turn our eyes to the broader legacy of Rome's golden age. What did it all mean? What did the empire leave behind, not in monuments or laws, but in memory? Finally, we reflect on Rome's enduring legacy, its warnings, its wonders, and what life at its peak reveals about the nature of civilization itself. The sun sets on the Roman Empire at its peak. Its armies are victorious, its cities humming with life, its law unshaken, and its gods revered. In this golden age, the empire seems unbreakable. But what remains of this world today? Not just in ruins or texts, but in the rhythms of how we live, govern, and understand our place in society. To answer that, we must step back and ask, what was truly Roman about Rome? What legacy did its people leave? Not just emperors and generals, but bakers, soldiers, scribes, and slaves. The answer lies not only in monuments, but in the habits, structures, and ideas of daily life that still echo through the modern world. Walk the streets of many modern cities, from London to Cologne, from Arles to Split, and you'll find Roman bones beneath your feet. Roads first paved by legionaries remain beneath highways. Bridges first built to march armies now carry traffic. Aqueducts still trace the hills of southern Europe, and the very word plumbing owes its origin to plumbum, Latin for lead, once used in Roman pipes. Even city planning owes a debt to Rome. The grid layout, central forum, public baths, temples, and amphitheatres became the model for urban civilization. Towns across Europe and North Africa grew from Roman municipia and coloniae, their foundations still shaping life centuries later. Perhaps Rome's most enduring contribution to the modern world is its legal system. Concepts such as habeas corpus, contracts, property rights, and due process all trace roots to Roman jurisprudence. The idea of a republic, a citizenry with duties and rights, persists in the institutions of modern democracies. The work of jurists like Gaius, Ulpian, and later Justinian helped codify law into frameworks that outlasted the empire. The Corpus Juris Civilis, compiled in the 6th century, influenced continental European law and remains the basis for civil law in much of the world today. Even the language of power, senators, consuls, imperium, remains embedded in our political vocabulary. Rome taught the West how to rule, not just through force, but through structure and ritualized legitimacy. Rome was never just a place. It was an idea of civilization, order, and universal citizenship. This idea survived long after the Western Empire fell in 476 CE. The Byzantine Empire saw itself as the continuation of Rome. The Holy Roman Empire borrowed the name to claim legitimacy. Even today, the idea of a Western civilization owes its framework to Roman cultural heritage. From Latin sprang the Romance languages: Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. Roman literature inspired Dante, Shakespeare, and Goethe. The architectural arches and domes of Rome appear in Renaissance cathedrals, Enlightenment courthouses, and even American Capitol buildings. Ironically, one of Rome's greatest legacies was the very religion it once persecuted. Christianity, born in a remote province of the empire, eventually became the empire's official faith under Constantine and his successors. It absorbed Roman organizational methods, feast days, even some temple designs. The Catholic Church, headquartered in Rome, preserved Latin, Roman law, and imperial customs well into the modern era. Papal titles and vestments echo the old empire, and the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, still wields global influence from a seat once occupied by pagan emperors. Beyond empire and institution, what of the ordinary Roman? Their stories may be harder to find in marble or manuscript, but they're no less vital to understanding the legacy of Roman daily life. A plebeian mother taught her children to read the alphabet scratched on a wax tablet. A carpenter in Gaul passed down tools to his son, who would one day build with Roman precision. A freedwoman in Pompeii ran a bakery, her name immortalized on a shop wall. A soldier on the Danube frontier kept a letter from home folded in his pack, written in careful Latin by his wife. A slave in a Roman villa lit oil lamps each night, whispering prayers to household gods who had no temples. These were the people who made Rome real, who woke early, worked long, shared meals, played dice, celebrated festivals, prayed to unseen gods, and hoped for better for their children. Their lives were full of duty and complexity, love and loss, triumph and toil, just like ours. The Roman Empire's golden age teaches us much about human potential. It showed how infrastructure, law, shared identity, and practical tolerance could create unity from diversity. It demonstrated how ideas could travel faster and last longer than armies. But Rome's golden age also contains warnings. An empire built on inequality and enslavement, no matter how advanced, carries deep fault lines. A society where citizenship is unevenly distributed, or where power concentrates among a few, is inherently unstable. A system that prioritizes spectacle over substance, bread and circuses, may lose touch with its civic soul. The decline of Rome didn't come overnight. It crept slowly through economic strain, corruption, overexpansion, and cultural complacency. Its lessons are not just historical, They are timeless. Walk the streets of Rome today, and the past rises all around you. Columns standing amidst cafes, ruins beneath traffic, inscriptions still legible after 2 millennia. But Rome's true legacy lives not just in its stones. It lives in our laws, our cities, our languages, and our values. We eat in communal spaces because Romans built forums. We believe in public baths, public libraries, and public debate because Romans saw civilization as something shared. We prize order, rule of law, and infrastructure because Romans taught us that society is strongest when it is organized, but humanized. So what was life really like in the Roman Empire's golden age? It was complex. It was unequal. It was ambitious. It was vibrant. It was above all human. Romans were not so different from us. They loved their children, feared change, worshipped gods, enjoyed laughter, and searched for meaning. And in doing so, they left a world behind, not just to be remembered, but to be learned from. The marble has cracked, the legions have marched away, but the echo of Roman life still whispers through our own. The golden age of the Roman Empire was more than a chapter in history. It was a window into the heights of human civilization. At its peak, Rome offered stability, infrastructure, law, and shared identity to millions across a vast and diverse landscape. Its cities were grand, its economy complex, its laws enduring, and its culture rich with tradition, innovation, and contradiction. But beyond the emperors and monuments, it was the daily lives of ordinary Romans that truly defined the empire. Their work, their worship, their struggles, and their joys tell a story as timeless as it is unique. From bustling marketplaces to quiet household shrines, from the roar of the Colosseum to the hush of a courtroom, Roman life was structured, vibrant, and deeply human. Rome gave the world roads, republics, and reason, but it also left behind lessons in hubris, inequality, and the fragility of greatness. It reminds us that empires rise and fall, but the values they embody, and the people who live them, leave footprints that stretch far beyond stone and time. To understand Rome is not just to study the past, it is to better understand ourselves.